Did you know there's more than one type of crash report in Texas, and there are different instances when you need to use each report? In this video, we'll talk about the types of crash reports in Texas, what you need to know to fill them out, and what you need to decode them, because sometimes the officer's crash report or accident report is not straightforward. You're going to see some codes being used, and we're going to walk through how to decode those crash reports. So the first type of crash report is the CR2 crash report. Now, this used to be maintained by TxDOT. It is no longer maintained by TxDOT, making it a little bit harder to find. They are available on our website. They're also available at your local police department. They're often called blue forms, but they're essentially a form that a driver would fill out after an accident. If there were no injuries or the damage that occurred from the accident was less than $1,000, it's almost certain that a police officer is not going to come out. And even where there are some injuries or the vehicles are still drivable, you might find some of the busier police departments are not coming out to the scene. That does not mean you shouldn't get a crash report. You should go fill out a blue form. You can download a blue form off of our website versus-texas.com, but you can also get them at your local police department. You can ask for a blue form and everyone at the police department will know what you're asking for. The driver's crash report is just that. It's meant to be filled out by a driver, not by law enforcement, and you're going to put down as much information as you possibly can, but they understand you're not law enforcement. They're not asking you for things like cause of the accident. It's certainly not for you to use the codes that we're going to see in the report completed by officers. So in a very straightforward manner, it's asking you for the location as best you can describe it. It's going to ask you the date and time of the accident, and then it's going to ask you for the vehicles that were involved. You're going to start with your vehicle, and then you're going to put down as much information as you have regarding the other vehicle or even train, pedestrian, bicyclist, other that was involved in this accident. You're going to describe any damage that you were able to note, as well as any injuries that you're aware of. And that could be your injuries, that could be your passenger's injuries, pedestrian injuries, or someone in the other vehicle who was injured. And at the very bottom, it's just asking you for a narrative that you can continue on a blank page. These reports are often necessary for insurance companies to make payments. The first thing that most insurance companies will ask when you report an accident is, have you reported it to the police? And as we talked about, the police don't come out to a lot of accidents, especially ones where injuries were not immediately apparent or ones where the vehicles were drivable. But the insurance companies are asking for these reports, and it's important that you go report this to the police. It's often that your police department is going to require you to drop it off. Some have email addresses that you can send it to, but you'll want to call the non-emergency number to your local police department and ask how they want this turned in. It does not go to TxDOT, it goes to your local police department. Once you have turned it into your local police department, you will also be able to tell the insurance company, this is the report that I've made. They will ask for a copy of it in most instances, and when you are describing what happened, that is a section you will likely want to discuss with your lawyer before you turn it in. Remember here, time is of the essence. The longer you take to report something, the more critically an insurance company is going to look at that. And if too much time passes, they'll start to look at whether or not the report is credible. The next type of report we see is the crash report or the accident report that an officer fills out. And it's very often the case that after an accident, you are trying to order this report from TxDOT because you will get it far more quickly than anyone else, you as a person who was involved in the accident. There are additional hurdles that TxDOT has intentionally set up that limit access to this from anyone else, even a lawyer representing you. So it's often the case that we'll walk a client through how to request this report on their own, and we will request it as well. It often turns out the request made by our client comes back more quickly than a request made by us. And again, that's intentional on TxDOT's part. They don't want your information being easily accessible by anyone else. you'll see that the Texas Peace Officers Crash Report, sometimes referred to as the CR3 or sometimes referred to as an accident report, starts off with some basic categorization. And here we'll start to see abbreviations that maybe you haven't come across before. Of course, there are accidents involving fatalities. A CMV is a commercial motor vehicle, a school bus, a railroad. MAB means Medical Advisory Board. That indicates the possibility that some medical condition could have contributed to the accident. There's a notation for whether or not this is a supplemental report and whether or not this accident took place in an active school zone. These categories allow statistics to be prepared at the statewide level. So for example, this is how we know how many fatalities occurred in Texas, how many accidents resulted in fatalities, and what percentage of cases involved fatalities, etc. Next, you'll see the identification and location section, which gives more information about the specific location an accident took place, including whether or not it happened outside of city limits. Now, not every accident report will be filled out completely, so don't be surprised if you run across a report that didn't have the exact latitude or longitude, but the officer is going to fill out as much information as the officer can reasonably provide, and particularly those things that are noteworthy. Next, you'll see a section that addresses vehicles, drivers, and other persons involved in the accident. What order a vehicle is listed in does not dictate whether or not that unit was the person who is responsible for the accident or one of the people involved in the accident. One of the things that may have jumped out to you already is where the numbers are on this crash report form. So for example, you'll see that there are pieces of information that are being gathered and there's no number next to it, yet you're going to come across items where there's a number like roadway system, roadway part, etc. It's important to understand, to decode what these accident reports mean, you need the code sheet, and you need to make sure the code sheet corresponds to the report that you're looking at. So for example, this is the CR3 report that is effective as of April 1st, 2023. So when I'm looking for the corresponding code sheet, I want to make sure it's for the same period of time. So code sheet for the CR3 report for 4/1/23. Other things that are going to stand out to you when you're looking at this code sheet after an accident include things like, did the other person have a restriction on their license? And if so, you're going to look for what that restriction was. Sometimes you get into a situation where there's a dispute about who was driving the other vehicle. So it's always interesting to know, what did the crash report say when the officer came out? Was there evidence or statements that suggested one person was the driver over the other? So for example, the officer may have run into a situation where the driver is saying no, they were the passenger, but the officer notes that person had the keys to the car and was the only person who had keys to the car. So you need those pieces of information that otherwise might just seem like, well, it's in there, it wasn't very helpful for me. So depending on the nature of the accident and what the other person later claims, all of this could be very useful information. The officer is going to note, is there a suspected serious injury or minor injury? Is there a possible injury? Was there a fatality? And sometimes you'll run into the officer just doesn't know. Perhaps the other vehicle took off and they don't know if there was an injury or not. Again, these codes have changed over time. Make sure you're looking at the right code sheet so you know what the severity level is referring to. Jumping down towards the bottom of the code sheet, you'll see the section that people are often most interested in, and it follows this coding system: XX-ABC-Y. XX tells you the direction of the force. And then you have ABC, which is the damage description. It's a 2 or 3 letter code, and Y is the damage severity on a scale of 0 to 7. Let's break that down a little bit more. XX is the direction of force, and it's on a scale of 1 to 12. And looking at this diagram, it's really not that obvious what that means. So I'm going to take you to a different image that helps you understand that XX a little bit better. This is not part of the crash report, but this helps you understand how the officer is addressing the direction of the force based on what they are seeing at the scene and what they are learning at the scene. We're starting essentially clockwise, going 1 through 12, and describing the direction of the force. So a front impact is going to be a 12. You have a front right quarter panel, that could be a 1. And so you're going to go down, you're going to see an impact that is coming from the center passenger side is going to be a 3, a rear is a 6. The center of the driver's side could be a 9, but that first 1 or 2 digit number before the dash is referring to that direction of force. Up next, you have the damage description, and this is a 2 to 3 letter code that comes after the dash in the report. And you'll start to see this diagram has codes like FC, FD, FR, RFQ, and they correspond to different things. So there's a distinction between FC, which is, for example, a utility pole and the front of the vehicle coming into contact, versus distributed contact, which would be the front of the vehicle comes in contact with another vehicle where the force is essentially proportionately spread across the front of this vehicle. This is a chart that's also not in the crash report code sheet, but it gives you more information where you can start to see that the damage is distinguished based on where the impact took place with the vehicle, and it's pretty specific. For that scale of 1 through 7, you'll see that officers are trained on what different levels of severity look like, so they have examples of what's a 1 all the way through what's a 7, 7 of course being the most severe. One of the other things that'll jump out on an accident report are, of course, if there are certain boxes that have a value. So for example, when we get to whether there was indication of drugs or alcohol, really 24 through 27, either through a breath test in the case of alcohol, blood or urine in the case of drugs and alcohol, or that a test was requested but refused. That could also be of evidentiary value in 24 and 25. If there was a drug found in the vehicle where you have a reagent test telling you that it might be positive for something, and if so, was it a central nervous system depressant, stimulant, hallucinogen, etc., where they're categorizing the type of drug that was found. Of course, you're going to want to know whether or not at the time there was proof of financial responsibility or insurance on the other vehicle. Numbers 37 and 38, of course, are going to be very important to anyone looking to see how the accident occurred. So 37 is the sequence of events. You can often have a sequence that involves multiple numbers, and certainly you can have, under 38, multiple factors and conditions that the officer believed contributed to the accident based on the information they have. It is not uncommon. Understand that just because an officer puts something down in the accident report does not mean that is the understand that these reports are the officer's impressions at the scene. Oftentimes it depends on who they talk to and what they're seeing at the scene. That does not mean a report can't be supplemented if there were additional credible information brought to the attention of the officer. So we've had cases where we've gone and pulled videos or the sequence of the lights at an intersection, provided that to the officer, and the officer issued a supplement changing what they originally believed. So this is as good as it can be based on the information the officer has. Your attorney has the ability to impact that if there is additional credible information out there that the officer simply did not have at the time they wrote this report, because it is generally not a possibility for an officer to go pull a camera from a surrounding business or some other private recording that was made or perhaps even the recording from your own vehicle at the time they're writing this report. So don't be discouraged if this is wrong when you have other information that can be provided to the officer. Be sure to talk to your attorney about that. The report ends with other factors, including vehicle defects, weather that could have contributed, as well as surface conditions, and notes about the traffic control devices. So for example, was the traffic light not working? There's a way for officers to mark that. A couple of big takeaways for the officer's crash report. One, you need to know what the accompanying code sheet says so that you can decode the values the officer has put into this report. Additionally, there are going to be some things like the diagram that will have codes on it that even with the crash report and the coding format, you may not be able to understand. So what we're doing to help you understand more about the CR3 report and decoding the report, we're going to put together a comprehensive article to accompany this video. You can find it on our website, TxDOT.com, and it'll walk you through a lot of the things the officers are trained on that, of course, could not be included in this code sheet because it's voluminous, but will help you understand what's being described in an officer's crash report in Texas.